Dust coated everything in Red Willow County that summer, except the jagged iron dragged behind a 12-year-old girl's wagon. Neighbors chuckled, calling her the little scrap rat, completely unaware that the heavy, useless trash she was hoarding would soon become the exact thing that saved them all from ruin. By the time the brutal July heatwave of 2018 hit Nebraska, the earth had baked into a cracked, unforgiving crust. For the generational farmers of Red Willow County, the lack of rain wasn't just a seasonal inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Foreclosure signs sprouted up faster than the stunted corn stalks. Among those hanging on by a fraying thread was Samuel Miller, a third-generation farmer who had buried his wife 3 years prior and was now terrifyingly close to losing the only home his daughter, Abigail, had ever known. Abigail, known to everyone simply as Abby, was a quiet, observant 12-year-old. While other girls her age were inside escaping the blistering afternoon sun, Abby spent her days walking the shoulder of the county highway, pulling a faded, squeaky, red radio flyer wagon. But she wasn't collecting discarded soda cans or pretty river stones. Abby was hunting for iron. Specifically, she was hunting for rusted, broken, and discarded horseshoes. It started innocently enough at the Lawson farm. Emmett Lawson, a burly, weathered man who ran a sizable cattle operation down the road, was in the middle of patching a tractor tire when Abby walked up his gravel driveway. "Mr. Lawson?" she had asked, her voice barely carrying over the hum of his air compressor. "Do you have any old horseshoes you don't want?" Emmett wiped the grease from his brow and stared at the skinny girl in denim overalls. "Horseshoes? What on earth for, Abby? You ain't got a horse." "I know," she replied smoothly, her eyes completely serious. "I just need the shoes. The rustier, the better, especially the big ones from the draft horses." Emmett let out a booming laugh that echoed across his empty silos. He walked over to a dilapidated wooden shed near his stables, kicked aside some rotting boards, and pointed to a massive pile of fiddied, mud-caked iron. "Tell you what, kid, if you can haul 'em away, you can have every piece of junk metal in that heap. Save me a trip to the dump." He thought she would take 3 or 4. Instead, Abby spent the next 3 hours systematically loading her little red wagon until the axles bowed under the sheer weight of the rusted iron. She dragged that heavy load 2 miles down the dusty road back to her father's property. Her small hands blistered and stained a deep, rusty orange. And she didn't stop with Emmett Lawson. Over the next 3 weeks, Abby visited every struggling farm within a 5-mile radius. She knocked on the door of Wade Garrison, a notoriously bitter farmer who was already in bankruptcy proceedings. Wade stood on his porch and mocked her outright. "And your daddy put you up to this?" Wade sneered, crossing his arms, trying to scrape together pennies at the scrapyard to pay off the bank. "Because let me tell you, sweetheart, rusted iron goes for about 4 cents a pound. You're gonna need a lot more than a toy wagon to save the Miller place." "I'm not selling them to the scrapyard, Mr. Garrison," Abby said politely, unfazed by his cruelty. "Can I take the ones by your fence?" Wade waved her off dismissively. "Take 'em. Take the rusty nails and the broken hinges, too. Garbage is garbage." The town of Red Willow quickly turned Abby's strange obsession into a running joke. At Dixie's Diner, where the local men gathered to drink black coffee and complain about the grain prices, Samuel Miller became the subject of hushed, pitying whispers. "Samuel's lost his grip," Wade Garrison announced one Tuesday morning, stirring his coffee aggressively. "He's drowning in debt, his crops are dead, and he's letting that little girl of his build a garbage pile in their front yard. It's pitiful. A man ought to have more pride than to let his daughter beg for trash." When the rumors finally reached Samuel, he felt a deep, burning shame. He was a proud man who had exhausted his credit, maxed out his loans, and sold off half his farming equipment just to keep the lights on. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, Samuel walked out to the yard. He found Abby sitting in the dirt, surrounded by hundreds of deformed, rusted horseshoes. She was sorting them by size and curvature, meticulously brushing the loose dirt off them with a wire brush. "Abby, honey," Samuel started, his voice thick with exhaustion. "People are talking. Wade Garrison said you were over there begging for scrap. I know things are tight right now, but we don't need to scavenge." Abby looked up, her face smudged with soot and grease. "I wasn't begging, Dad. I was collecting. There's a difference." "But what is this for?" Samuel gestured frantically at the rusted mountain of iron. "You're dragging hundreds of pounds of dead metal across the county. Look at your hands. They're cut to ribbons." "It's for my project," Abby said, her voice entirely steady. "I read about something in one of Grandpa's old engineering magazines. I just need a little more time." Samuel rubbed his face, the stubble scratching against his calloused palms. "Abby, there isn't any time. Gregory Dawson from the bank called today. If we don't come up with $22,000 by the end of August, they're taking the farm. A pile of rusted horseshoes isn't going to fix this." Abby stood up, grabbing the handle of her wagon. "Then I better work faster," she whispered, pulling the cart toward the old, abandoned tobacco barn at the far edge of their property. The old tobacco barn hadn't been used since Samuel's grandfather ran the property. It was a massive, looming structure with peeling red paint and a sagging roof, but it had 4 solid walls, a concrete floor, and heavy sliding doors. That night, Samuel watched from the kitchen window as Abby dragged her wagon inside. A few minutes later, she came back out, pulled the heavy doors shut, and wrapped a thick steel chain around the handles, securing it with a master lock. By the end of July, the farm's situation had gone from dire to catastrophic. The well was running dangerously low, and the bank had officially filed the paperwork for foreclosure. Samuel spent his days in a numb haze, meeting with bankruptcy lawyers and desperately trying to find a buyer for his remaining acreage before the bank auctioned it off for pennies on the dollar. But while the Miller farm was dying in the daylight, it was coming alive at night. It started on a humid Thursday evening, as Samuel was sitting on the back porch, nursing a cheap beer and staring blankly at the foreclosure notice when he saw it. A bright, blinding flash of blue-white light erupted from the cracks in the boards of the old tobacco barn. It pulsed rhythmically, casting long, eerie shadows across the dead grass. Then came the sound, a high-pitched, tearing screech of grinding metal, followed by the deep, rhythmic crackle hiss of an electrical arc. Samuel dropped his beer, the glass shattering on the wooden deck, and sprinted toward the barn. He grabbed the heavy master lock and rattled it violently. "Abby! Abby, open this door!" The grinding stopped. The blue light flickered and died. A moment later, Abby's voice called out from the other side of the heavy timber. "I can't, Dad. You can't look, not yet." "Abigail Miller, you are playing with fire in a wooden barn. Open this door right now." Samuel roared, panic seizing his chest. "I have the fire extinguishers from the garage, and I swept the floor," she yelled back. "I'm using Grandpa's old MIG welder. I know what I'm doing, Dad. Please, just give me until the end of the month. Please trust me." Samuel stood in the dark, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew his father's old welding rig was in there, hooked up to a heavy-duty generator, but he hadn't touched it in years. The thought of his 12-year-old daughter handling a 220-volt arc welder in a barn filled with rusted junk terrified him. But as he stood there, pressing his forehead against the rough wood, he heard a desperate, pleading tone in his daughter's voice that broke his heart. It was the exact same tone she had used when she begged the doctors to save her mother. 30 days, Abby," Samuel whispered, his voice cracking. "That's all we have left anyway." As August rolled in, the mystery of the Miller barn became the hottest topic in Red Willow County. The nightly flashes of blue light and the relentless sound of grinding metal could be seen and heard from the county highway. Wade Garrison, who had recently lost his own tractor to repossession, became obsessed with what was happening on the Miller property. He was convinced that Samuel was running an illegal chop shop to pay off his debts. "I'm telling you, Emmett," Wade spat, leaning over the counter at the hardware store. "Nobody locks up a barn and runs welding equipment at 2 a.m. unless they're cutting up stolen cars. That little girl collecting horseshoes, it's a cover, a distraction so nobody looks twice at the trucks rolling in at night." Emmett shook his head slowly. "Samuel ain't a thief, Wade. He's desperate, sure, but he ain't a criminal. Desperation makes men do crazy things," Wade muttered, his eyes narrowing. 3 nights later, Wade decided to prove his theory. Under the cover of a moonless sky, he parked his truck half a mile down the road and crept through the dry, rustling corn stalks onto the Miller property. He navigated his way to the back of the old tobacco barn, looking for a loose board to pry open. He found a wide crack near the foundation and knelt in the dirt, pressing his face against the splintered wood to peer inside. But Abby had anticipated prying eyes. She had nailed heavy, black industrial tarps across the entire interior perimeter of the barn. Wade couldn't see a thing, but he could feel the intense heat radiating from the metal being fused inside, and the smell of ozone and melting iron was overpowering. Suddenly, a heavy hand grabbed Wade by the collar of his jacket and hauled him violently to his feet. "Trespassing on my land, Wade," Samuel growled, his face inches from Garrison's. He held a heavy steel wrench in his right hand, his knuckles white. Wade stumbled back, brushing the dirt off his knees. "I'm looking out for the community, Samuel. We all know you're going under." Dawson from the bank told everyone the auction is set for Friday. "What are you hiding in there?" "Stolen parts. You think you can drag the rest of us down with your illegal operations?" "My daughter is in there," Samuel said, his voice dangerously low. "And if you ever set foot on my property again, I won't just throw you out. I'll bury you under the dirt you're standing on. Get out." Wade backed away, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Friday, Samuel. The bank is coming Friday. Whatever junk you're hiding in there, the whole town's gonna see it when the auctioneer opens those doors." Wade was right. The deadline had arrived. On Thursday evening, Gregory Dawson, a sharp-featured man in a tailored suit who looked completely out of place on a dusty farm, drove his polished sedan into Samuel's driveway. He didn't even get out of the car. He simply rolled down the window and handed Samuel a manila envelope. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller," Dawson said, though his voice lacked any real empathy. "The sheriff will be here at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow to oversee the property transfer. The public auction begins at 9:00 p.m. You and your daughter need to have your personal belongings vacated by then." Samuel stood in the driveway, holding the envelope as Dawson's tail lights disappeared down the road. It was over. Generations of Miller sweat, blood, and tears, completely erased by a string of bad harvests and compound interest. He walked heavily toward the barn. The blue flashes of light had stopped. The grinding was silent. Samuel placed his hand on the heavy master lock. "Abby," he called out, his voice hollow and defeated. "It's time. Come on out, sweetheart. We have to start packing." The lock clicked. The heavy steel chain rattled and dropped to the concrete. The sliding doors groaned in protest as a soot-covered, exhausted 12-year-old girl pushed them open. Her overalls were scorched, her hands were wrapped in heavy leather welding gloves, and her face was streaked with sweat and dirt. But as Samuel looked past her, into the dim interior of the barn, illuminated by a single halogen work light, his breath completely left his lungs. He dropped the foreclosure papers into the dirt. "Dear God in heaven," Samuel whispered, falling to his knees. Abby took off her welding mask, a weary but triumphant smile cracking across her dirt-smudged face. "I told you, Dad, what it becomes is priceless." Golden morning light filtered through the cracks of the tobacco barn, illuminating the colossal structure that dominated the concrete floor. Samuel could not speak. He could barely breathe. Standing before him, welded entirely from thousands of discarded, rusted horseshoes, was a breathtaking life-sized sculpture of a rearing Clydesdale draft horse. It wasn't just a crude amalgamation of metal, it was an anatomical marvel. Abby had used the massive, heavy shoes Emmett Lawson had given her to form the thick, powerful chest and hindquarters of the beast. For the flowing mane and delicate musculature of the face, she had carefully bent and layered smaller pony shoes. The rust, which Wade Garrison had so viciously mocked, hadn't been painted over. Instead, Abby had used a wire grinder to polish specific edges, creating a stunning gradient effect. Where the light hit the polished steel, the horse gleamed like burning silver, while the deep, oxidized red of the rust settled into the shadows, giving the sculpture an incredibly lifelike beating pulse. It was a monument to the raw, enduring spirit of the American heartland, forged from the very decay that was killing it. "Your mother," Samuel choked out, tears carving tracks through the dust on his face. His late wife had grown up raising draft horses, a passion she had passed down to her daughter before cancer stole her away. "I call him Iron Resolve," Abby said softly, leaning against the heavy wooden door, her small body trembling from exhaustion. I've been sending pictures of my progress to some people on the library computer at school, Dad. I told them we needed help. But before Samuel could ask what she meant, the crunch of gravel echoed from the front driveway. It was 8:02 a.m. Sheriff Miller arrived first, his cruiser kicking up a cloud of Nebraska dust. Right behind him was Gregory Dawson, stepping out of his air-conditioned sedan with a clipboard tightly gripped in his hands. And then came the vultures. Pickup trucks lined the shoulders of the county highway. Neighbors, curious onlookers, and opportunists looking to score cheap farm equipment poured onto the Miller property. Wade Garrison was at the front of the pack, a smug, satisfied smirk plastered across his weathered face. He was holding a wad of cash, ready to buy Samuel's beloved John Deere tractor for pennies. Clayton, the county auctioneer, set up his portable PA system on the front porch. The atmosphere was heavy, suffocating under the brutal August sun. Samuel walked out of the barn, holding Abby's hand tightly. "All right, folks," Clayton's voice crackled through the speakers. "We're here under order of the bank to auction off the assets of the Miller farm. We will be starting with the agricultural machinery, then moving to the livestock trailers, and finally—" "Wait," Samuel's voice boomed across the yard. He marched straight up to Dawson and Clayton. "The property is yours, Dawson, but the contents of that tobacco barn belong to my daughter. They are personal property, built with scavenged materials that were freely given. And before you sell my family's legacy, she has the right to auction her property first." Dawson rolled his eyes, checking his gold wristwatch. "Mr. Miller, this is highly irregular. We don't have time to auction off a pile of rusty scrap metal." "Let him do it," Wade Garrison shouted from the crowd, laughing maliciously. "Let's see the little scrap rat's garbage pile. I'll bid a whole $5 for the rust." Clayton sighed, nodding to Samuel. "Lot number 1, the contents of the tobacco barn." Samuel turned and nodded to Abby. With a deep breath, the 12-year-old girl grabbed the heavy iron handles of the sliding barn doors and pulled with all her might. The rusty hinges screamed, and the heavy doors parted wide. The morning sun flooded into the dark interior, striking the polished edges of the towering Clydesdale. The entire yard went dead silent. Nobody moved. Wade Garrison's smug laughter died instantly in his throat, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of absolute disbelief. Emmett Lawson took off his sweat-stained baseball cap, stepping forward as if pulled by a magnetic force. The sheer scale, the magnificent ferocity of the iron beast rearing up toward the rafters was overwhelming. It looked as if it might smash through the roof and gallop across the dying cornfields. "Good Lord in heaven," Emmett whispered reverently. Did that little girl build that?" Dawson's jaw dropped. His corporate composure shattered as he stared at the masterpiece. What is that?" Wade Garrison finally found his voice, though it was frantic and defensive. "It's a trick. It's just welded trash. It ain't worth nothing but the weight of the iron." But just as Wade spoke, a sleek, jet-black Mercedes-Benz Sprinter van with New York license plates turned off the highway, its tires crunching loudly onto the gravel driveway. The crowd parted as the luxury vehicle came to a halt right in front of the barn. The doors opened and a sharply dressed woman in a tailored navy pantsuit stepped out, completely ignoring the dust coating her designer shoes. She carried a leather portfolio and had an earpiece tucked into her ear. Behind her stepped 2 men in matching black polo shirts, carrying professional lighting and camera equipment. "Excuse me," the woman called out, her voice slicing through the thick, humid air. "I am looking for Abigail Miller." Abby stepped out from the shadow of the barn, her hands still wrapped in her oversized welding gloves. That's me." The woman smiled warmly, extending a hand. "Abigail, my name is Victoria Harper. I am a senior acquisition agent representing the David Werner Gallery in Manhattan. When you emailed our curators the final photos of this piece yesterday morning, our entire office stopped working. I took the red-eye flight into Omaha last night." Victoria walked past the stunned crowd, stepping up to the sculpture. She reached out, running a manicured finger over the seamlessly welded joints of the horseshoes, the mathematical precision of the weight distribution, the emotional resonance of the oxidized iron. It's a profound commentary on the industrial decay of the American West. It is raw, it is brilliant, and it is a masterpiece. Wade Garrison's face turned a violent shade of purple. "Lady, you're out of your mind. That's the junk I threw out of my own pasture." Victoria didn't even look at Wade. She touched her earpiece, speaking clearly. "Yes, Mr. Zwerner, I am looking at it right now. The photos did not do it justice. It is magnificent." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Understood." Victoria turned to face the crowd, her eyes locking onto Clayton, the auctioneer, who was still gripping his microphone in shock. "I understand this is a public auction," Victoria announced clearly. "My gallery represents several private collectors who are highly interested in acquiring outsider art of this magnitude. Specifically, I am authorized to bid on behalf of a proxy buyer for Alice Walton, chair of the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. We intend to place this piece in their permanent American Heartland exhibition." Dawson, the banker, suddenly snapped out of his stupor. A greedy light flashed in his eyes. "Hold on, as the lien holder of this property, the foreclosure papers state you hold a lien on the real estate and the agricultural assets, Mr. Dawson," Samuel interrupted, stepping between the banker and his daughter. "This sculpture is classified as intellectual and personal property of Abigail Miller. You have zero legal claim to it." Dawson gritted his teeth, knowing Samuel was absolutely right. Clayton swallowed hard, tapping the microphone. "Well then, we will commence bidding on lot number 1, Iron Resolve. Do I have an opening bid?" Victoria Harper raised her hand instantly. $50,000. The crowd gasped. Emmett Lawson let out a loud, booming cheer. Wade Garrison looked as if he was going to vomit. $50,000 for the junk he had laughed at. But Victoria wasn't the only one there for the sculpture. A man in a tailored gray suit, who had been standing quietly at the back of the crowd, raised a paddle. $75,000. I represent a private collector from Chicago." Victoria didn't miss a beat. $100,000. The bidding war erupted with a ferocity that Red Willow County had never witnessed. The numbers climbed higher and faster than the summer temperature. Samuel fell to his knees in the dirt, openly weeping as he pulled Abby into his chest. She hugged him back, her soot-stained face buried in his shoulder. $150,000, the man from Chicago called out, wiping sweat from his brow. $200,000, Victoria countered instantly, her voice cool and unbothered. $220, the Chicago agent fired back. Victoria touched her earpiece again, nodding once. $340,000. The yard fell completely silent. The Chicago agent sighed, shook his head, and lowered his paddle. Clayton's voice shook as he spoke into the microphone. $340,000 going once, going twice, sold to the David Zwerner Gallery and the Crystal Bridges Museum. The entire farm erupted into deafening applause. Emmett Lawson threw his hat into the air, whooping at the top of his lungs. Neighbors who had whispered behind Samuel's back now clapped and cheered, tears in their eyes. Wade Garrison, utterly defeated and humiliated, turned on his heel, got into his rusted pickup truck, and sped away in a cloud of dust. He realized with sickening clarity that the very metal he had mocked, the garbage he had given away, was worth more than his entire farm. Victoria walked over to Samuel and Abby, pulling a sleek leather checkbook from her portfolio. "We will arrange for a specialized flatbed to transport the piece to Arkansas by Monday. Abigail, you have an incredible gift. The art world is going to know your name." Samuel took the check, his hands trembling violently as he stared at the numbers. $340,000. It was enough to pay off the bank, buy back the equipment he had sold, and secure Abby's college fund with a small fortune left over. He walked directly over to Gregory Dawson, who was looking at the ground, his face pale. "The debt is $22,000, Dawson," Samuel said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "I'll have my lawyer wire the funds to your branch in 1 hour. Now get off my land." Dawson didn't say a word. He turned, got into his polished sedan, and drove away, leaving the Miller farm exactly where it belonged, in the hands of the Millers. That evening, as the brutal heat broke and a gentle, desperately needed rain began to fall over Red Willow County, Samuel and Abby sat on the back porch. The blue flashes of the welder were gone. The barn doors were open, the massive iron Clydesdale standing guard in the fading light, waiting for its journey to a museum where millions would admire it. Abby leaned her head against her father's arm, watching the rain soak into the thirsty earth. "You saved us, Abby," Samuel whispered, kissing the top of her head. "No, Dad," Abby smiled, looking out at the beautiful, rusted iron beast. "Well, we just showed them what happens when you refuse to throw away things that look a little broken." If this incredible true story of a young girl's determination and hidden genius touched your heart, please hit that like button and share this video with your friends and family. Sometimes the most beautiful treasures are hidden right under our noses, waiting for the right person to see their true potential. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring real-life stories that prove miracles can happen when you refuse to give up. Thank you for watching.